Eve Barlow is a Jewish writer from Glasgow, Scotland, who carved out a very successful career in the music industry as a journalist, only to be exiled from that industry because of her advocacy and her activism in the Jewish community. She spends a lot of her time now writing for her Substack called Blacklisted, which I will link in the description below. But she is at the tip of the spear when it comes to the conversation being had right now in the Middle East, a very powerful voice that we can all learn from. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Here's Eve Barlow.
The experience of the past of life since October 7th has been very unpredictable in terms of when certain emotions hit at particular times. You know, as with everything that is an emotional challenge, you don't know when and where you're going to be when something affects you. But I have found it is now a risk for me to run around my local reservoir because of certain things that happen there. You know, whether they're microaggressions because I wear a Star of David around my neck, which I've started to hide actually, just so that I can get out for a run without even thinking about that. But today I had an issue and I just had to leave the reservoir and come back because there had just recently been, they've attempted to do it a couple of times, but there's just recently, I think as soon as yesterday, posted an entire wall of posters of the 240 plus hostages who have been kidnapped. They didn't post 240 posters, but I would say there were about a line of 30 posters, and every single one of them has been taken down. And there was a written note on the top of the wall that said, "Love from your local," I won't say the neighborhood, Hamas support network.
You're in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles. I'm in one of the most progressive liberal parts of town, which is therefore one of the most dangerous parts of town. I'm pained to say. You know, I have a very strong hypervigilance, and I'm
As you should.
as I should. And so I see something like that, and I don't know whether it's just that we're not managing to communicate well enough, why we feel such a visceral reaction to what amounts to present day active Holocaust denial.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to get into with you is it's hard for us to understand why people don't understand.
Right.
You know, it becomes like, why are they not getting? It's very perplexing to Jewish people, I think, at this present moment. It's like, how are they not getting it? And this has been happening forever. So you are a very strong and smart voice in the Jewish community. But let's go back a little bit. And where are you from? Where did you grow up? You are also a music and pop culture journalist. Had a lot of success until you didn't. Talk us through that a little bit, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes.
Sure, I'll try and do the Cliff's Notes version. I am from Glasgow, Scotland. I lived there until the age of 17 and went to Manchester University to study law. Graduated during the height of the recession, around 2007, 2008, and found myself perplexed by a question of, you know, how I should continue studies, what I wanted to do professionally, given how woeful the job market was at that time. And I did continue to pursue a career in law, but at the same time, I also began a career as a music writer because I thought that if I was a straight A student who went away and got a law degree and I was still struggling to get arrested in the legal industry, I may as well pursue a pipe dream. So I started writing about music in my spare time. I was always fanatical about music, and you know, at this point in time, I had to kind of go back to Glasgow for a while, and Glasgow is fortunately an incredible music city. So I managed to take advantage of the fact that it was heaving with venues and, you know, promoters and fanzines and things like that. And I was a hustler, and I was, effective at sort of like using what was around me. So I started blogging and using things like Twitter, which were just taking off at that time. And I kind of built a little bit of a little like nest of confidence for myself, I guess, as someone who wrote about new music or tried to speak to new artists. And eventually I chanced my luck and managed to get some work experience down in London with some of my favorite music magazines. And once I got my foot in the door, I just kind of made a perpetual nuisance of myself until someone gave me a menial task to do. And I made a nuisance of myself for about 6 years before I eventually was hired to be the deputy editor of the New Musical Express, which is the #2 position at one of the most famous music titles in the world. And I was 25 at that time, went on to break some enormous artists and cover a lot during my tenure at NME. And in 2014, I decided to leave London and I came to LA and pursued a freelance writing career and did that right up until kind of just after the pandemic started and things started to change quite drastically in my life story around the death of George Floyd and activism that I was starting to. I'd already sown the seeds of that. I'd started writing about my experience as a Jew actually as early as 2014. But by that point, the anti-Semitism had risen so abruptly and was so apparent and obviously apparent throughout social justice movements all
locally
over
in London, or you were just seeing that worldwide?
Well, one of the reasons why I left London was because I was so cognizant of the waves of anti-Semitism that were hitting, especially in the progressive world. And I worked at the NME, which I think maybe in America it's hard to fathom how music titles become so overtly politicized, but NME is extremely left-wing and always has been. So it was completely kind of part and parcel of working at the magazine that you had entirely leftist politics, and also those politics extended to the Israel-Palestine conflict, which I found absolutely incredible, given that I think to this day I am the only person who is Jewish to ever have held a senior editorial position at the NME. So given that everyone at NME seems to have been pro-Palestine since the dawn of time, but no one has skin in the game, tells you a lot of how to understand the context of how things got as bad as they did in progressivism. But suffice to say, by the point of the BLM movement exploding around George Floyd's death and some of the very obvious anti-Semitic attacks I was seeing around the protests that were being excused away as just rightful anger by BLM protesters at large, who were a vast majority of voices at that point in time, I got more and more I would say clear in my advocacy and more and completely unapologetic, and it cost me a lot. So that's
right. So you start to speak your mind, and that has a very damaging effect on your career at that point, right?
Yes, it does. It's not something, when you get whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it cancelled, or I call it blacklisted, that's the name of my Substack, but whatever you want to call it, I guess for some people it happens in a moment. For me, it was kind of like a series of events. It was a series of tweets over time and a series of a gradual shift in the culture where there was less and less tolerance of centrist voices who were trying to inject some critical thinking, let's face it, into very emotional subjects that were driven by anger and fear and envy and ideas about suppression of power and very, very emotive activism. And anyone who was trying to kind of present facts in a sober way without attacking these emotions was nonsensically pushed out of the fray or shunned. I mean, it's kind of akin to, I guess, like evangelical shunning, where you're just outcast from your community for something so harmless that's perceived as a crime, and a crime against humanity, really. I mean, the reaction is so so tangible.
It was a very you're with us or against us sort of culture, right? And
Absolutely.
there was really no nuance in the conversation.
Zero was completely tribal and polarized. And so I would say that what happened to me, it was over a course of time. I had these different sort of peak moments, mainly online, days in which I had said specific things or written a specific article over the course of a year. And I would say the beginning of the year, well, the beginning, it started with the 2019 December general election in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn running for Prime Minister, the then leader of the Labour Party, who sit to the left of centre. Jeremy Corbyn, some would say smeared, others would say exposed, including myself, as an anti-Semite who was presenting as being the sort of like panacea to all that was ill in British society, except had a woeful track record of allowing Jew hatred to fester in his party, especially among the more radical leftists in his party. So from that moment through 2020 and the BLM moment right up until May 2021, when Hamas and Israel were involved in a conflict around a neighborhood of East Jerusalem called Sheikh Jarrah. Between that, let's say, about 15-month period, I had these kind of spikes in activity around particular messaging that I was sending out. And slowly but surely over time, I just found myself utterly pushed out of my line of work. And, I've found out, it's been revealed to me more and more over time how intentional that was. Although I knew at the time it was intentional, it's difficult to prove it because it's happening in secret, or people are talking on Slack groups that exclude you. But, if I could say, for example, there was one extremely prestigious title that I was a regular contributor to, who every single staffer at that title and editor all unfollowed me on the same day. So if that wasn't the subject of a Slack channel, then that would be a wild coincidence for about 15 individual journalists who work for a specific title to all unfollow me on one day.
Unbelievable.
But I do remember that day it would have been June 2020. It was a Saturday. It was the first major run of protests in LA to protest George Floyd, and synagogues were vandalized. And I remember tweeting something pretty innocuous, if you look back at it now, that said, you can't fight one form of hate with another form of hate. And how dare you, in the name of eradicating anti-Black racism in America, vandalize Jewish places of worship? These are not Urban Outfitters. These are holy temples for Jewish people. And the subtext of this was that I knew why they were doing it. They were doing it because they are anti-Semitic and they believe in a Jewish trope about capitalism and money linked to Jews. It's an economic libel that is medieval.
The Rothschilds and all that sort of control.
Absolutely.
Of course.
And they also believe that the Jews are the worst emblem of white supremacy. And so this kind of, not double think, but double reason double justification as to why they were attacking.
Which is crazy because we have so much in common. It's so amazing that the Black Lives Matter movement has chosen to take that stance. I find that very perplexing as well.
Yeah, it's incredibly disappointing, especially because our history, when the Jewish community and the Black community come together, amazing change can happen. And
civil rights
movement is a profound example of that. And you see the images of the bold rabbinical leaders of the time marching hand in hand with Martin Luther King, and these are extremely emotionally resonating images, and all the more bittersweet now because we have seen how the divisions have been so successful in dividing and conquering. I mean, this is the whole premise. And early on when the BLM movement was putting itself together, their original charter was anti-Zionist. They had an actual statement in their charter that necessitated denouncing and demonizing the state of Israel and believing in the liberation of Palestine. And people just decided to overlook that for the sake of the movement. Now, why would you be so irresponsible as to overlook the actual charter of the organization that is purporting to be the leader in a new movement against racism, systemic racism in America? I am never, ever going to sit here and deny that there is a huge endemic problem in this country with anti-Black racism, because there is. However, if you're electing these people as your leader, and you're following their lead, and their charter is fundamentally anti-Semitic, then shouldn't this be something that is addressed from the get-go and not something that we wait to address later down the line, now that there are posters in downtown LA outside Grand Central Market of BLM insignia with paragliders, Hamas paragliders with the BLM logo on them that say BLM loves Hamas?
Very painful to see that, because
right.
that's not just disagreeing, that's celebrating.
It is. It's inexcusable. And there are so many quote unquote pacifists and peaceniks, or as I now call them, Hamasniks, who will argue with you round and round and round in circles. It's actually a very abusive, coercive tactic to try and justify that their marches are marches of liberation and peace. And I'm here to point out that, first of all, these marches were happening before Israel even launched its ground offensive in Gaza.
Yes.
So they're not actually, these marches happened in and around October 7th in total celebration of what Hamas did. They were dancing in the streets before the graves of our dead were even laid, like, never mind gone cold. It's very clear, but people will obfuscate. And why is that? And I think it comes back to the question we were talking about at the very beginning of this. It's that, people are trying to insist that there's no binary between good and bad and good and evil, but morality is binary. There is no middle ground. And they know what they're doing is wrong. There's a reason why every time there's a camera in the face of one of these kids who's pulling down posters, they suddenly go mute, or they have their head down and their hood up, or they're walking away, they're running away. You only run away or refuse to answer a question when you know that A, you have no answer, and B, you're doing something shameful that's wrong. They know what they're doing is wrong, but they're enjoying it. And that's the root of anti-Semitism. I always say this, it's a mental disease, it's a conspiracy theory, but the reason why people believe in conspiracy theories is because they're so much fun and they get high off it.
But how have we gotten to this place of absolute ridiculous delusion, like Queers for Palestine, the whole, it's absolutely like
Workers for Palestine.
I don't understand. I mean, I think people just need to travel more. I mean, maybe that's what it comes down to, but I just don't understand with a lot of the younger millennials, the Gen Zs. I've seen people with like hammer and sickle tattoos and just these people who are revitalizing these causes without any, but they're a social media generation, and it spreads like wildfire. It's a huge problem. And I guess one of the points of this podcast in the first place was just to try to understand why people don't understand.
I think it's triple pronged. You mentioned social media. That's one thing, where everything has been reduced and remarketed and rebranded, and an entire generation has grown up with this ADHD style consumption of constant information. There's actually too much information for an emotional brain to take in a healthy manner. So they're constantly feeling like they're being attacked by terrible information over and over and over again. And they are under the impression, I mean, I know that people take huge offense at being called like a snowflake generation, but their fragility is so profound because of the amount of information they have been, forced to contain in their brains at one time, and the way in which the mind is constantly stimulated by disaster after disaster. So in that moment, what you're trying to do, I think, as them, is take some control back. And I think that's become the appeal of taking a stand for this, that, and the other, and using your voice, even though you're mimicking slogans and propaganda that you're fed online, because there's only a finite amount of room for the information. So it has to be propaganda style. And it has to be bite-sized. And by the way, as we know, fact and truth and historical accuracy, unfortunately, takes a long time to consume and isn't easily digestible and doesn't fit with the format. So it's already...
Why isn't it working in the other way? Why isn't it working in our favor? They go with GoPros, they paraglide in and just slaughter people, and it's on camera. Mm-hmm. Why can't it go in that? Why can't the narrative go in that direction?
Unfortunately, because of two things. One, the prevalence of anti-Semitism in the world, that we are not trusted as a source. Jews have no credibility. We've never had credibility. We have had to house the crimes of the Holocaust in museums all over the world to try and maintain the promise of never again, which, by the way, has failed and doesn't work. We have encountered this problem generation after generation for millennia of people not, the non-Jewish world not accepting Jewish reality and Jewish truth. So there's a fundamental distrust of anything that Jews do and say and show. But the second thing is that the non-Jewish world believe that Jews can never be victims, because either we're the vermin in the runt of, the sewer rats, or
the oppressor.
Or we're the, the goblin, like hook-nosed goblin with our hands around the world, controlling everything, the ultimate puppet masters. So for that reason, they don't actually, even though a terrorist group can GoPro the worst massacre that has happened to Jews since the Holocaust and share the footage themselves and show themselves the indescribably heinous acts that they have produced and incurred upon Jewish people, the world is still ill prepared to accept them, because the Jews can never be victims of hate. There was a man, another great example of this is unfortunately just from Sunday, from 3 days ago. A man called Paul Kessler was murdered in broad daylight in Westlake, Los Angeles, by a Palestine protester who hit him over the head and bludgeoned him to death with a megaphone until he fell to the ground. And
where I lived there many, many years. I lived 2 blocks from that incident.
It's terrifying. And the entire world media has described this as an incident in which a man died from injuries caused from falling and hitting his head on the concrete. Magically. But this is, unfortunately, I am always deeply upset by these things, but I am never surprised or shocked, because this is how it goes. And I was talking earlier about the 3 things that explain why this is happening. So one is the social media that has completely, has, like, I don't know how you would say uneducated a generation, but, misinformed an entire generation about reality and the truth. 2 is the universities themselves, who purport to be teaching accurate history, who have not been doing so since the Soviet age, because of our links with Russia, with the Russian, ideals about anti-Zionism being some kind of like righteous project, that Zionism was racism, which is something that, the betraying United Nations, an organization that was set up in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust to make sure that such atrocities don't happen to human beings again, that are supposed to protect human rights and prevent genocide, and now the United Nations actually excuses genocide. That seems to be its purpose. Yes. But, you know, it very swiftly, the United Nations became a nation, United Nations against Israel and against Jews. So the education system in the West is inspired by this Soviet anti-Zionist rhetoric that snuck its way into the UN as well from 1975, very explicitly onwards, yes, when the UN decreed that Zionism was racism. So they're getting all of their information too bastardized from university institutions that they're supposed to be able to trust to pass down this information accurately. And then the third reason why this is happening, I think it's more of a, you know, it's less of a, I guess, tangible reason, but I think we're dealing with a generation of people who are so far removed from war.
Yes.
That they don't understand, at the same time as being so overly exposed to brutality and violence, they're so highly triggered by it that they see everything as something that's as bad as the Holocaust or that's a crime against humanity without understanding just the reality of war. Like, of course, all of us are deeply affected and upset about deaths of innocent civilians. Nobody wants war. Nobody likes war. And anybody who can't come forward and say that is, as far as I'm concerned, not part of my team and not someone I want to be associated with. However, there is a just war theory, and there are laws around just war. And Israel is acting within the law. The only people who are arguing otherwise are either anti-Semitic institutions, such as the UN, or people who are deploying these slogans of genocide, war crimes, humanitarian crisis, who have no authority and are truly just parroting Hamas propaganda and playing into the hands of the oppressor, so to speak. And doing so because, you know, the terrain is being mass manipulated by Iranian money, Iranian and Russian fake social media accounts. Yep. You know, they are the proprietors of all of the bot accounts on the internet. And, you know, you only have to look at the 2018 election. No, the election before that, the Hillary, 16? The Clinton, the 2016, sorry.
Yeah.
Getting my countries and years mixed up.
It's all a blur at this point.
The 2016 election,
yeah,
to see what the effect was of Russian manipulated social media information. You know, Iran has a similar infrastructure, if not greater than Russia, and Iran and Russia have a common goal right now. So you can only imagine what strings are being pulled behind the screens to infiltrate Twitter, Meta, all of these apps that everyone gets all of their information from. And then the other elephant in the room is TikTok. Yeah. Who's behind TikTok? China, you know? So it's, if you want to infiltrate the minds of the West, then they're
succeeding.
That's a pretty successful way to do it. You know, one of the earliest examples of immediate pull towards disinformation was the explosion at the hospital, or the rocket that landed on the hospital. That was a Hamas rocket. An enormous percentage of Hamas rockets, I don't have the exact figure on the top of my head, but it's something like 35 to 40% of Hamas rockets backfire and land in Gaza. So this was a misfired rocket. There was even video footage of it, but the rocket hit a parking lot. It killed about 3 dozen people. But what we immediately saw all over the news was Israel bombed a hospital, intentionally killing 500 people.
Yes.
It took Israel at that point almost 7 days to count the number dead from the October 7th massacre. But immediately the media believes, great, because the media is desperate to believe this narrative. That's what it wants. This is the narrative the media wants. So we see minimizing and obfuscating of Jewish lives, murdered. And then we see almost foaming at the mouth for the moment Israel can be caught red-handed as a war criminal, right?
Yes.
And, this is quite simply anti-Semitic bias in the global media. But there is so much about this war in which you see example after example of the IDF truly, and I know that this is a provocative statement at this point, truly being one of the most moral and humanitarian armies in the world, more so than some of the liberal Western armies that exist. Even yesterday, creating a safe crossing for hundreds of civilians to get away from the rocket fire to another part of Gaza, where they had military tanks being camouflaged under trees that were protecting Palestinians with white flags, making this crossing so that they could get to safety, because the IDF wants to minimize civilian casualties, which is something Hamas doesn't give two shits about. For Hamas, the more civilian casualties, the better. That's why they have built an entire Gaza, tunnels of hell and horror underneath as a terrorism bunker, for which they have anticipated this moment and this war. Decades and decades of preparation for this moment of provoking Israel to attack. We hope and understand that the hostages are in the tunnels, but God knows under what conditions and what their status of health is right now. I was at an event on Wilshire last night in Los Angeles, where there were two individuals who survived the Supernova Music Festival massacre, and then one parent of one child, a daughter, 22 years old, who remains a hostage, who they suspect is alive, and then one woman who is not an immediate, but is a relative in LA of an entire family in which two people are known murdered, and the children are currently held hostage. I think there's 4 children that she's related to that are held hostage. And listening to them was just the reality that these families of these 240 people are living through right now. The audacity for the world to say, no, you're not allowed to go and rescue your loved ones it's unbelievable, the dissonance that they have, that somehow it's Israel that's doing something wrong by going to recover its own civilians who have families in the deepest of pain that we can never imagine, all around the world, and truly all around the world. These are international citizens. A lot of them are not Israelis. They're people from France, from Germany, from Thailand, from America. These are citizens of the world. The world should be standing in arms with Israel right now, and it's not, because the world is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and when I see celebrities propagating, posting, reposting, we were talking about the UN, the numbers of people killed, like in Gaza. If you go on the UN website, it's going to give you that number, right? 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 people. And then directly under that, it's going to say numbers derived from where? Where are those numbers coming from? They're coming from the Ministry of Health from Gaza, which is what?
The Ministry of Health.
It literally says the Hamas-led Ministry of Health on the UN site.
It's so clear. And the hypocrisy is beyond. The hypocrisy of asking Jewish people to provide proof of beheaded babies.
Yeah.
Because they won't believe it. And this is a subject of conversation for a week, that the President Biden himself has to come off stage and arrive back the next day to make the same speech again, having now actually seen the images of the beheaded babies to confirm that this is real. And yet we are gaslit and disbelieved. But the terrorists over here, who have been prone to lie about everything all the time, are immediately believed. And again, I hate to be the bearer of excruciating news, but the reason is because this is what they want to believe. This is the moment they've been waiting for. And by the way, not in this war, for decades of their own bullshit. They have been waiting for this moment to say, aha, we told you. those evil Israeli bastards and their Jewish supporters.
The biggest problem, as far as I see it, is that people failing to disassociate from Hamas. If you have an organization that in its charter is to eradicate Jews and you fail to disassociate from them, how is it safe for me to trust you? There is no safety there.
Yeah, I mean, they are actively avoiding condemning Hamas.
Yes.
You know, Ilhan Omar took to her pulpit yesterday in the House of Congress, flaming anger, like rage.
I didn't see that.
Oh my God, she was enraged, going like, you know, filling everyone's cup up with that emotional rage that they're all baying for, and basically, you know, giving people permission to be as angry as she is, and yet she refuses to condemn Hamas. She refuses. She talks about Palestinian liberation and the war crimes that Israel are committing, but refuses to acknowledge October 7th, refuses to condemn Hamas, and refuses to acknowledge that the words of her colleague, Rashida Tlaib, who has, by the way, a Palestinian flag outside her office on Capitol Hill and no American flag. This woman is from
And
Detroit.
I'm glad she was finally censured, but that's not enough.
It's not enough. This woman is from Detroit. Like, she wasn't actually. So is she representing the people of America here, or is she representing Palestinians? And by the way, she's representing American Palestinians, but not the Palestinians who need representation. Those people don't have a voice. So not only is this evil in terms of the total like cleansing of genocidal rhetoric towards Jewish people worldwide, it's also completely minimizing and erasing the Palestinian voice. The Palestinians need to be free from Hamas.
And that's an important point. It is a global genocide. It's not just Israel.
We're seeing Jews being beaten up in the street all over the world. We're seeing Molotov cocktails being thrown at synagogues in Montreal. We're seeing attacks. We saw the death of a man in LA on Sunday. A woman, you know, burglarized and killed in her home in France, you know, recently. We're seeing this. We're seeing this all over the world. This is just permission to start killing off the Jews again. But what I was saying is that, you know, anyone who has moral integrity knows that the issue here for the Palestinians is that they need to be freed from the terror regime who have subjugated them for decades. By the way, everything that they did to Jews on October 7th during that massacre, they have been doing to their own people, with no one to witness it or report on it other than other Palestinians who are so terrified of speaking out. There was a clip that I saw that was verified the other day of a woman being hushed in the street, for a Palestinian woman, for trying to say that Hamas were terrorizing its own civilians in this current war to try and raise the death toll, to demonize Israel more and drive up the emotional support worldwide for Hamas. They're playing everyone, and everyone's falling into it. But yeah, it's suffice to say that it's working. Their tactic is working. They have tugged on the emotional heartstrings of the Wild West, and everyone believes that they are liberating Palestine, and they don't understand what that means or know whether or not they're actually speaking for the people who need help. All the while, the IDF are actually the only actor in the world who are prepared to try and liberate the Palestinians from Hamas. And hopefully, the day after Hamas, we will have a situation in which we can start looking at rehabilitating the Palestinian community in Gaza, giving them leadership that will inspire them to have fruitful futures, and, you know, an economy that can match what they come through. People don't understand that tens of thousands of Gazans have work permits to come across the border every single day to go to work in southern Israel. So because they're paid something like 8 to 10 times the amount that they would get in Gaza. So if we can empower the people of Gaza to have a completely different set of values and a different lifestyle and a different morality, then there is no reason why there can't be a two-state solution. But with Hamas present, there will never be a two-state solution.
They don't want that.
No.
And
they're very explicit about not wanting that from the river.
I know, but for some people don't want to believe them. Where do we go from here? And everybody wants the Palestinian people to thrive. How do we?
I mean, I think we need to keep digging our heels into the ground, keep using our voices, but also not pandering to the fear mongering that is being created around our silencing. You know, even if we can't reason with people who are so far gone now, always remember in the kind of the good, like, heartland of America, and people who know what the truth is and who appreciate the truth and want to learn and want to listen. I've said to people who want to know how to show up for me, you know, the most important thing that you can do is sit down and ask me all of the questions you've always been afraid to ask me about, and then listen to what I'm saying and trust that I'm speaking the truth. I think more than just concentrating on how we communicate to the wider world and trying to get a message across to people who don't necessarily believe us, I think the most important thing is to come together as a community and to strengthen and empower ourselves and each other with the knowledge so that we don't go crazy, because they're trying to make us go crazy right now. Because the only way to overcome truth sayers and people who know the truth and can speak the truth is by making those people look crazy. And, you know, we have to make sure that they can portray us however they want. You know, there's that a famous Golda Meir quote about how, you know, rather be alive than be dead and worry about what the world thinks about us. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, it's the important thing is, yes, they might all think that we're crazy, but we can't let them make us crazy. We have to be proud of who we are and know what our truth is, because the most important thing as survivors in the world, and we all are survivors, all of our families have survived, we've survived thousands of years, is to be able to speak our story and speak the truth.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. And maybe as we finish up here, you could point us to some good people that you've been watching. Are there any good accounts that you follow that can really educate people? I know a lot of people want to be educated at this point. Because I get those messages, people wanting to know more. They just don't know where to go.
Yeah, there's so many of us on Instagram, really, really impressive voices and very diverse. So, you know, like everything from other like queer Jews to Black and brown Jews to, you know, feminist Jews, Orthodox, you know, basically run the gamut. So you can also see how diverse a people we are, and maybe like tally up with someone that you feel you can relate to or trust the most. But I mean, you know, I'm certainly one of the leaders. There is a friend of mine called Eden Cohen who runs a site called A Wider Frame, and that is an incredible news source. Noah Tishby, who is formerly the special envoy for anti-Semitism in America for Israel, she has become, you know, an unstoppable leader in this moment. There is an American-Israeli journalist called Emily Schrader, who is a very impressive feminist too, and also a hard news reporter who is getting the facts out faster than anyone at certain points. And certainly a peer of hers called Aviva Klompus, who mostly works on Twitter. There's an activist called Chen Mazig. He lives in London, and he is an Iranian-born Jew whose family escaped Iran. He grew up in Israel, and he's very progressive and very clear about this current moment in time. There are so many voices out there. There's truly, and once you find one of us, you'll find the others, because we all tend to post each other's work.
Well, thank you. And I hope people spend the time, especially, you know, if they're up in the air about it, to learn more about it and hear all the voices and do the research before they start to propagate things. And also follow your Substack, Blacklisted, which is an amazing read every single couple days. Are you posting every day or every couple days?
Every day at the moment.
Every day. Okay. So go follow Blacklisted.
Thank you.
Substack. And Eve, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you giving a platform to my voice, and and train jujitsu. I will.